School budgets go hand in hand with maintenance, planning, replacement, or new capital projects. Superintendents must lead in establishing policies, procedures, and communication so that purchases, repairs, or the replacement of buildings and grounds, transportation, or technology issues do not blindside the school budget or upset the school budget. During the first modular, you had an opportunity to conduct a needs assessment of a building. This activity was designed to familiarize you with external process structures, internal structures, mechanical systems, and the safety needs of buildings. A superintendent should establish a procedure that their head of maintenance and principal at each building conducts an annual assessment of the building. I'd recommend developing a facility condition assessment checklist real similar to the one that you used during the first modular, but adapt it to fit the needs of your buildings and your school district. The superintendent, I believe, has three real important roles in financing capital projects and maintenance budget. First, they need to establish effective policies that are aligned to their mission. These policies include policies for purchasing and the school budget that are clear and that everyone within the district understands the priorities of the policies and the expectations. Second, a superintendent should develop procedures to help the school district reach its strategic planning goals. A facility condition assessment checklist is a valuable resource on the facilities and grounds side. Also, it's important to conduct regular needs assessments and develop a capital forecast. The needs assessment and capital forecast is what helps to establish a 5-year strategic plan. And I can't understate the importance of developing a 5-year strategic plan that guides the district and it helps individual buildings and individual departments establish goals that connect to that strategic plan. The third area a superintendent needs to be effective in is communication. Some examples would be weekly district admin team meetings, hosting bi-weekly building and grounds district committee meetings, and hosting monthly building and grounds board committee meetings. Then also providing weekly reports about facilities, buildings and grounds, not only to the school board, but keep the community and parents updated as well. The district building, grounds, transportation, and I include technology and transportation with the BG&T committee, should be used, and a facility condition assessment checklist at each building should be completed to help and assist long-range or capital forecasts. I use long-range planning and capital forecast interchangeably, and will do so throughout this report. The capital forecast will determine when carpets, gym floors, auditorium curtains, a track, indoor bleachers, outdoor bleachers, playground equipment, lights, mechanical systems, cooling systems, kitchen equipment, buses. It's going to determine when all those large capital items need to be replaced. The capital forecast will also determine when warranties are expiring and will prioritize the replacement based on the information received in the facility condition assessment checklist, which should be discussed extensively with the district and school board BG&T committees. Communication about costly capital equipment and projects is ongoing. There's always a shelf life and timeline for the replacement of all capital equipment, buildings, and grounds. Here's an example of a capital forecast. As you can see, a capital forecast could be completed using a software program or just by developing a simple spreadsheet or Google Doc. I keep a Google Doc in Blair, and then we also use a program to help assist us with capital forecasting. So along the left side, you can see some of the costly capital items like air conditioned units, tracks, buses, and so on and so forth. And then across the top, it gives you an ability to track what the item is, a description of the item, when it was purchased, what the purchase price was, when the warranty is expected to expire, and then also gives you an idea of the repair history of the item. It gives you the opportunity to schedule repairs, plan out future repairs, which can assist you in budgeting for those repairs. And then the most important part of the capital forecast is planning for the replacement of an item. So the year and the predicted cost new is kept there. We also track hours or miles depending on what the capital item is. The BGT&T district team must be skilled at anticipating when these capital items like bus engines or compressors on cooling units will need to be repaired. This skill comes from tracking the age, hours, workloads, miles, etc. of all the capital items. A transportation director should track miles every week on all routes and be prepared to report that information to the BGT&T district team so that preparations can be made in each annual budget for repairs. The maintenance director should monitor compressors and heat pumps, check playground equipment regularly. Age and use will determine when items need to be repaired and replaced. The BGT&T district team must be structured to include different directors' reports as part of their meetings. For example, activities schedules are something that we look at a year ahead and plan in advance to identify the potential use of buses and vehicles, small vehicles, and so that we're prepared to notify the business manager if a line item needs to be increased or if there's a purchase that needs to be included into a line item inside the general fund. We'll talk about those funds, how to budget for those in just a little bit. This process takes a lot of time and, again, really effective communication. Team members will have to learn to give and take because every department head and principal is going to advocate for their building or their department. So the superintendent must bring everyone to a consensus about how long buses are expected to run, or you're going to keep carpets in buildings before they will be replaced. The safety of students is always the top priority. The key really is how you can stretch $1 to meet the demands of $5 without jeopardizing the safety of students and reducing the quality of education. So as you look at this capital forecast, again, some districts use programs like School Dude to assist them in developing a capital forecast. You can purchase that software program, but again, it can be just as simple as a Google Doc. And in Blair, like I said, we keep both. We do contract with School Dude, but I keep a separate Google Doc so that we can communicate easily during weekly meetings with the district BGT&T committee, and then also with our school board committee that meets monthly. Question that you might ask your superintendent is, how do they plan for their annual maintenance, repairs, and replacement of major capital items? How do they coordinate those plans within the school budget? And how do they communicate short-term planning for the replacement repair of capital items? And what about long-range planning? Do they use, or what types of programming do they use for capital forecasts? When a school board is given detailed capital forecast information with items and areas identified that should need repaired or replaced. Replacing items will be much easier to get approved. No one likes surprises. When a superintendent tracks the usage, age, miles, etc., and carefully plans for the repairs and replacement within line items within the general budget or the special building fund. And again, we'll talk about how to categorize capital items within each fund. But when that's done, it makes for no surprises. And hopefully the only surprises you'll see is when capital items outlast their life expectancy or require fewer repairs than expected. Of course, contingency funding always needs to be put into place for the compressor that needs replaced after only 6 years instead of 15, or the bus engine that needs replaced after 40,000 miles. But the point is, the superintendent must lead their team to effectively plan for the wear and tear and have funds available to replace and repair items when necessary. A mistake a superintendent often makes is buying a new capital item or completing a project and then forgetting to plan for the deterioration that will happen as a result of its use. They must lead the district principals and administrators to input every single new purchase into the capital forecast. And they should coach principals and district administrators on updating the condition of these products. Once per week, the superintendent should meet with their district administration. During this time, they can continuously look and evaluate the capital forecast. The Nebraska legislature does not believe in providing state funding for school construction or the maintenance of buildings, despite the fact that 75% of states provide funding for school construction. Other states have construction funding programs where money is given for construction called grant and aids, according to Earthman. Some states have matching grant and aid programs where the state matches local funding. Equalization grants are also given in many states for schools who don't have the ability to raise enough funds locally, mostly due to poverty reasons. It's also, you need to be aware that the federal government does not fund school construction. Over the years, they provided some funding, but overall, they don't fund school construction. So schools in Nebraska must either pay as they go or use the general fund, the special building fund, the qualified capital purpose fund to build up enough revenue. The challenge is that the Nebraska legislature puts a cap on the amount of cash reserve a school can collect. So the special building fund is one fund that has unlimited amounts that can be carried forward. However, there is a cap on the qualified capital purpose in the general fund. All construction must be coded inside the special building fund. So a school must understand and plan carefully how to use the general fund, qualified capital purpose fund, and all other funds. I want to go through each of those funds with you at this point. The general fund finances all facets and services of the school district. The receipts are classified according to the source, and we'll go through that in just a little bit, while its expenditures are classified according to specific functions. The general fund is maintained by all operating school districts in the state. And the general fund represents most all of a school district spending, and 80% to sometimes 85% of the general fund is made up of payroll. General fund transfers support the depreciation fund, the lunch and the activities fund, and the employee benefit fund. The depreciation fund is another valuable resource to use for the capital purchase, but understand the general fund supports that fund. So there's line items that we're going to talk about in a little bit that can be placed for maintenance inside the general fund. The special building fund is where all construction occurs. It is established for a school district who is acquiring or improving sites or erecting or altering or improving buildings. It's funded through the sale of bonds, sale of property, or by taxing. The superintendent would tax and collect receipts, which the primary sources for revenue would go directly into the special building fund. Regardless of the source of money to be used for building construction and related costs, it's important that remember that all income for this purpose shall be accountable through this fund. Any construction, meaning any construction that takes place, the expenditures must be coded within the special building fund. General fund expenditures for the purpose of this fund are not allowable. So the special building fund accounting provides a much more effective means of identifying those construction expenses. And if there's more than one special building fund activity, you should code it separately within the special building fund. So the general fund, special building fund, and qualified capital purpose funds combined have a lid of $1.05. The special building fund limit is 14 cents. So, for example, if spending in the general fund represents $1.05, then that's the maximum, and no money could be taxed for the special building or qualified capital purpose funds. That's something that when I became the new superintendent at Blair, and there's a number of schools in Nebraska that's overall funding, and for us it was due to high personnel costs. Our personnel represented almost 90% of our overall, not just general fund, but our entire budget. So we didn't have any flexibility to increase taxes because we were again already against $1.05. So it's something you want to look at as a new superintendent coming into a district. What's the levy that's been requested traditionally for the general fund, special building fund, and qualified capital purpose? Another reminder for superintendents: you must publish a budget summary and a budget notice 4 days prior to a hearing on the proposed budget, and another hearing on the tax request where a quorum of the board is present. The final opportunity to hold this hearing and amend the budget is September 19th. That's the deadline. But you would have to hold a hearing for your general fund budget, and you're also, again, going to provide notice for your tax rate for the building fund and the general fund and the qualified capital purpose fund. So I'm going to go back to the special building fund. The special building fund is designed really to support small capital projects. So say your enrollment is increasing and you need to expand 2 classrooms in an elementary school. If you have money built up in your special building fund, this would be a good time to provide that addition. It's also used for the replacement of tracks and building and grounds projects that don't take a lot of money. A school district can generally build up $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, maybe even a little bit more in the special building fund. I believe it's important for you to have a cash reserve in the building fund again, so that you could be targeted for special projects like the replacement of roofs. That would be a good fund for future planning for the replacement of roofs and some of those things. The Qualified Capital Purpose Fund is designed specifically for the abatement to address a potential environmental hazard, accessibility for students who might need more accessibilities into a building or to an area, life safety code violations, life safety hazards, or if you have mold which exists within one or more of the existing school buildings, Qualified Capital Purpose Fund can be used. There is a limit of 3 cents on this fund, and again, any work that's done on abatement projects related to the acquisition of new property or the construction of a new building or expansion of existing building or remodeling of existing building for the purposes other than abatement of environmental hazards, accessibility barriers, life safety codes. Um, you, you cannot use it for new construction. So the Qualified Capital Purpose Fund is a fund that the legislature have changed the restrictions to this fund. The the limit used to be 5 cents, and you were able to use it as part of newer projects. And again, there's been a lot of changes to this fund in the past couple of years and through legislation, and so now there's limits to 3 cents. Again, I would recommend that a district has a cash carryover because not all buildings are equipped with elevators and up to date with accessibility codes. Most schools have had asbestos taken out or removed, but if you ever get into a situation where you have students that, again, need more accessibility, maybe you need to replace an elevator or a lift or add an elevator or lift to a stairway or something like that, it's good to have money in this fund for small projects related to abatement and accessibility. Again, the Qualified Capital Purpose Fund falls inside that $1.05 limit levy. So if you're spending $1.02 on the general fund, you could levy 3 cents in Qualified Capital Purpose, but then you can levy any amount for the special building fund. So you really have to plan accordingly and know what limitations you have within your budget based on the general fund. Janice E-Rate and Bill Bevan from the Nebraska Department of Education Finance Office would be great experts to call in case you're having more questions about the Qualified Capital Purpose Fund and how you might use that. Another thing to remember is if you do levy for the Qualified Capital Purpose Fund, you have to hold a budget summary and a budget notice hearing, and you must publish advertisement for those meetings 4 days prior to the hearings. Again, the hearing must take place and the budget adopted by September 19th. The challenge is certified taxable valuations usually don't arrive, or they're not required to arrive until August 20th. So you really have only about a month to plan to levy the Qualified Capital Purpose General Fund Special Building Fund. Let's talk about the depreciation fund. A lot of school districts utilize a depreciation fund. It's funded inside the general fund. So, for example, if a superintendent wanted to set aside, let's say, $500,000 a year into the depreciation fund, it would be considered a line item expense going out of the general fund, coming into the depreciation fund. So again, it falls inside that $5 limit because it's part of the general fund. And it's established to facilitate the eventual or future purchases of costly capital items or outlay. You can reserve money into the general fund, and you can allocate monies from the general fund again to transfer over to the depreciation fund. A school district can divide this depreciation fund into more than one account. And for example, inside the depreciation fund, you might have an area that you're going to replace buses with, another area that you're going to build up to replace roofs, maybe playground equipment, and so on and so forth. The key to pay attention to a depreciation fund is there is a limit to your cash carryover, and it's based on your overall budget authority. Depending on the size of the school district, for some it's 35%, and others it's a little higher. But again, where the special building fund, there's no limit to your cash carried forward. There is a limit to depreciation. So going back to a budget strategy, that's why I think it's important to have line items in your general fund, and we'll talk again about it in a little bit, so that you always have the ability to purchase items. Like, for example, I'd recommend putting a line item for a new bus or two buses in to your general fund. The hard part about budgeting in the depreciation fund is, again, the limits with the cash reserve. And if you get to a position where you don't have a line item in your general fund, and maybe you only have $1.5 million available in your depreciation fund, might not be enough to replace all of the items that you need to replace. So again, building a capital forecast first and helping that educate your budget on what year each item needs to be replaced helps for the planning of the utilization of the depreciation fund and the general fund. One last note that I wanted to share about the depreciation fund with you is, again, I mean, we talked about the limits of the depreciation fund. One benefit to the depreciation fund is that even if you don't spend the money, like you decide that maybe you've targeted a bus replacement in a line item for a general fund, well, if you push that money forward to the depreciation fund, it still carries forward. It's there for you to spend in future years. Again, so the school board can also decide to not fund the depreciation fund. Otherwise, if you create a line item in your general fund, what ends up happening is it falls into your cash or your overall cash reserve. But either way, it depends on the school and the preference on how to use a general fund or depreciation fund. Another idea I would recommend is utilization of loans in your special building fund and your QC puff. You can a school district can borrow up to 70% of the unexpended balance of total anticipated receipts for the general fund, special building fund, or the bond or qualified capital purpose undertaking fund for the current school year. And these funds may be used to make loans to each other, or they can be used to help purchase capital projects. So there's a major benefit of taking loans. One strategy that I've used in the past was I'd collect taxes, but then I'd also plug a loan into the special building fund. So it was sort of a contingency, and the reason I did it is in case a project cost a little more than what was expected. I always had that ability to go out and get the loan, plus I would tax the amount necessary to replace the project. The bond fund, this fund is utilized for most all major capital projects, financing a new construction, financing a significant renovation or replacement of a building. So a bond fund should be used to record all the receipts and the investment interest and the payment of the bond principal and interest and other related costs. If the fund balance is not sufficient to meet the interest or the bond payments from the bond fund, the general fund can be used to help assist these payments. Revenue from a levy to retire bonds in any school district is retained in a separate fund by the county treasurer, the finance institution serving as the fiscal agent, or the school district. Funds shall be dispersed upon appropriate demand, and all records of transactions in this area shall be maintained inside the bond fund. Proceeds from a bond issue shall be deposited into the special building fund to be expended for the actual building project. Again, remember, any construction, the expenses come out of the building fund. They don't come out of the bond fund or the general fund. The tax levy for this fund is restricted for expenditures other than principal and interest. So let's talk next about how you would determine a tax rate based on the financing of upcoming projects. In Nebraska, each year, the county assessor for which your school district's property is located and certifies the property valuation for the district. A certified taxable income is sent to the school district by August 20th. A superintendent requests taxes based on the projected expenses they've established. So here's how it works. The superintendent will determine how much they will need to tax based on the total taxable income available. If the taxable income increases, then a lower tax rate can be requested. If the taxable income decreases, then the tax rate needs to be increased. If there's a projected loss in other state aid or state resources, like TIOSA aid or federal revenues, then an increase in the tax rate is necessary. If a superintendent anticipates increased spending and all other revenues projected neutral, again, a tax rate increase is necessary. In Nebraska, a superintendent must always err on the side of taxing more unless they are carrying a secure cash reserve. Tax rates will be established for the following funds. So again, $5 lid revenue lid for the general special building qualified capital purpose fund. There's a $5 lid on the general fund, 14-cent lid on the qualified capital purpose fund, and 3-cent lid, 14-cent lid on the building fund, and a 3-cent lid on QC Puff. Here are some of the local revenue sources. Again, the majority is going to come from the tax rate that you establish, but when you work to establish a budget, you're going to also look at past revenue for car line taxes, motor vehicle taxes, and other local taxes like daily sales from food services, fees from student membership organizations, extracurricular fees, county fines, tuition, so on and so forth. You also will receive federal revenue. Majority comes through the federal nutrition program, and then you get a large majority in E-rate, Title I, Title II, and then depending on the characteristics of your district, you might receive Title III, Title IV, Title V, and then Title VIII is for impact aid for districts who have government services within their district. So that's rare to receive Title VIII funding. There's also funding available from the federal government for IDA, for rural schools. There's REAP, there's Head Start funds, and then all schools receive McKinney-Vento homeless funding. Some of the state funding is TIOSA, and equalized school districts receive, and the more equalized you are, the more TIOSA state aid you would receive in Nebraska. For special education, about 45% to 50% is funded. I think it's been 48% the last couple of years. Also, so there's school age special ed and also special ed transportation. There's state apportionment funding, prorate motor vehicles, state funding, and the state also funds for nutrition. Personal property is something that we've seen major reductions in Blair, so it's something that I keep an eye on. Personal property tax credit has been increased more recently, and it's again, these are some of the state monies that you'll receive that will help you to plan where you're going to establish the tax rate. So after you've looked at your local funding sources and you've looked at the federal funding sources and the state funding sources, then you determine what's needed or what you might need to tax For your general fund, and again, the general fund funds nearly all activities in a school district, your personnel wages, your curriculum, transportation costs, maintenance costs, on and on and on. So let's say you determine that and you learn that your total certified valuation, the assessed valuation is $1 billion, and you determine that you need $10 million to fund the general fund. You're going to set aside $500,000 because you're going to replace playground equipment at 3 elementary schools, and you've got uh, a need to put 2 lifts into a school on staircases, so you're going to budget $100,000 in your qualified capital purpose fund. So again, you see the limits, and now we need to decide what your tax rate is going to be. For example, let's say you need 10 million for the general fund, and let's say that a dollar for the that you want to levy a dollar for the general fund. So first thing you're going to do is convert that tax rate, that dollar, into a decimal. So $1 equals 0.01, a dime would equal 0.001, and a nickel equals 0.0005. Multiply your total certified valuation, which we determined was 1 billion, by the 0.01, the converted tax rate that you're going to request. That would give you $10 million. Okay. For the special building fund, again, you needed $500,000. So let's convert, let's say that you want to levy a nickel. So let's convert the nickel into a decimal, which is 0.0005. We're going to multiply the 1 billion assessed valuation by the 0.0005, and it would equal the 500,000 that you did need to fund your special building fund. So again, you establish a tax rate of $1.05. Now you've reached the capacity, so you couldn't tax anything, collect anything for your qualified capital purpose. I hope you understand kind of how this works. It might be easier to determine what a penny is worth and then build up from there. So for example, if you multiply that certified valuation, 1 billion, by a converted penny, which is, again, you're converting the penny to a decimal. So every 1 penny on a billion valuation equals $100,000. So again, if you're needing 9 million to fund your general fund, needing 90 cents then. If you're wanting to fund 5 cents in the special building fund, then 100,000 times 5 pennies would equal $500,000. And then if you're able to fund your general fund with 90 cents, then you'd have room to levy the qualified capital purpose fund at 3 cents, which would give you $300,000. So that's how that works. It's how you determine your tax rate. And again, a lot of this is predicated if, let's say, your total federal resources plus your total state resources. So let's say your annual spending is 12 million, and you get 1 million in state TIOSA aid and 1 million in federal aid and local receipts that you're projecting. So then you would need to tax 10 million to equal the 12 million of spending. Of course, I always say overestimate. So you might want to increase the tax rate locally, but then that gives you an idea how you would establish your taxes. Coding the annual financial report and reporting ongoing budget to the school board is important, and transparency is necessary for planning and monitoring a school budget. Each year, a superintendent must prepare a budget that meets the requirements of an annual financial report called an AFR. In Nebraska, the NDE has developed these codes that you're seeing that schools must use when budgeting and reporting expenditures. First, an activity is classified as an expense or a receipt. Then you must determine which fund the activity is classified under. For example, a maintenance purchase can be placed inside the general fund 01 for operations, non-instructional, 3,000, and the activity might be for the purchase of cleaning equipment, which is supplies 600. Then the activity is coded by building so that you can anticipate what's spent at each building. So I highlighted in red the funds that you would utilize for budgeting your building, grounds, even transportation. But the general fund, you're going to have some line item codes. We're going to go through those here in just a little bit. And the depreciation fund, again, you're going to have money coming out of the general fund going into the depreciation fund, and that might be where you target replacement of buses and so on and so forth. So the key is taking that capital forecast, determining what is needed to be replaced each year from the capital forecast. And then also, when you've done those walkthrough evaluations that we talked about earlier, and you've listed items that have significant wear and tear, or you've identified in your capital forecast when you're going to repair items or even replace items, then you start building a budget for some of the line items within the general fund. And then again, we talked about the bond fund, the special building fund, and a qualified capital purpose fund, that being more, those three being more for construction, right? So let's look at the function area, 3,000. So if you've got non-instruction areas like maintenance, you're going to code either in the general fund or the depreciation fund. Again, depending on your preference, I like to use the general fund as much as possible, create line items. So on 01 for an expenditure -2 -3,000, because it's going to be for operations, right? If I want to transfer money from the general fund into the depreciation fund, it would be 01-2 an expenditure, and then 8,000 for a transfer into the depreciation fund. But let's just back up and use the 3,000 code, and from there, maybe we're going to purchase supplies for an elementary school in your building. So I would budget 01-2 for an expenditure -3,000, and for supplies 600. Then you'd code the building from there. So that's kind of how you start building your budget, determining what the costs are. Now, again, it all fits together, like a puzzle, because if, let's say, 90% of your general fund is going towards payroll, because that's locked in, that's a guarantee, it only gives you 10% left over. So on a $10 million budget, if $9 million is going toward payroll, you only have $1 million to spend on everything else, your curriculum, your substitute teachers, your bus, your transportation. So it leaves maybe only $100,000 left over for maintenance and repair. So again, we talked about how do you squeeze, 5 cents when there's only a penny available. It's the challenge. And as a superintendent, you start to value effective maintenance, because the longer buses last, the longer carpets last, the less stress it puts on your building budget. Okay, let's go through another example. Let's say that you're going to purchase or you're going to hire a custodian at a building. Again, you would start with it's coming out of your general fund. So 01, it's expenditure 2, it's a non-operational cost 3,000, and then you've got your salaries as your object code. So I'm going to go through a list of, based on the AFR, and you're required to turn in codes in this manner to the Department of Education, and then also as part of your financial report. So these are the new updated ESSA codes, but there's a line item for 2515 for buildings and sites. Okay, this is any improvement of district lands or buildings inside your building fund. Your qualified capital purpose fund is not a general fund expenditure, allowable expenditure. The 2600 series is for the operation and maintenance of plants. Okay, so activities concerned with keeping a physical plant comfortable, open, safe. They're all going to fall under the 2600 series. So, for example, 2610 is the operations of buildings. So this is where you would code the daily use for operating, lighting, and heating and ventilation, so on. Also included here are building rental, property insurance, and then for 2620, it's the everyday maintenance of buildings. So this is where custodial salaries are coded, and in any of the activity that's associated with the maintenance of a building. When you look at the care and upkeep of grounds, so it's coded 2630. This includes mowing, snow removal. This is improving anything outside the buildings, but not the buildings themselves. 2640 is a code for the care and upkeep of equipment, maintaining equipment, mowers, snowmobiles. Again, if you plug them into your capital forecast, you predict the age when they're going to age out or when anticipate the repairs, you can pull from that capital forecast to help build your budget each year. So again, it's a fluid activity, and it requires a lot of communication with your building custodians who's using the equipment every day, and your director of maintenance or your building principals who oversee the use of this equipment. And then 2650 is, these are more of your general purpose vehicles, depending on the size of your district. Most districts have tractors or work trucks. Other districts might have more vehicles code under 2650, but again, going back to capital forecast, this is where you're going to budget for the maintenance and repair. So the annual oil changes, or the ongoing oil changes, or where you're tracking the mileage and you're counting on, hey, we're hoping to get 8 to 10 years before we might need to replace brakes or something like that. So again, it takes a lot of time to consider those needs. And then 2660 is for security. And in the fourth week, we're going to talk a lot about safe schools, keeping a school safe. This is where you code that item under 2660, 2670, and 2680 is back to the operation and maintenance of plant services. That for example, if you feel like you purchased an item, you can't code it anywhere else for maintenance and operation, you can code it under 2680. The 4000 series deals more with new construction or renovation. Land acquisition is 4100, only can be used in building fund. 4200, any land improvement, grading, filling, environmental remediation, building fund only. Architect services, 4300 in engineering is the area where you code any purchase requisitions you'd have for architects or engineering services. As you're developing educational specs, which we'll talk about in week 3, this is where you line item code that. Again, these specs are important to help support architects and engineers in their initial stages of designing a new building, called the schematic design. They also use these specs as part of the design development stage. 4500 is building acquisition and construction, again only used in the building fund. Then we have 4,600, which are any activities which would help improve maybe fencing, walkways, tunnels, or landscaping. And then building improvements can be coded 4,700. This is small projects, maybe remodeling within the building. Maybe it's putting in a suspended or taking one out. And then 4,900 is acquisition and construction. 5,000 deals with debt services, and again, this when you're looking at your bond activity or interest, you code under the 5,000 series, and then 99,200 are bonds outstanding at the end of each year. This is a debt amount remaining after bond principal and payments have been paid for a fiscal year. So next, it's important for a school superintendent to have purchasing policies that meet the requirements under Nebraska state or whichever state you're superintendent in, those state statutes. So in Nebraska, familiarize yourself with 13-610. The policy should list the procedures for requesting purchases. And here's an example. Any school employee who orders any supplies or equipment outside of that which has been included in the annual budget and without written authorization of the principal or superintendent shall be personally liable for payment for these supplies or equipment purchase. School employees or students purchasing supplies and equipment out of an activity account must first secure a purchase order from the principal that authorizes them for the purchase. Failure to do so will cause the person to be personally liable for payment for the supplies or the equipment purchase. Any purchases up to $5,000 by statute don't require any sealed bidding. Purchases from $5,000 to $90,000 requires the superintendent to request proposals for the purchases which have a sale price within the established limit. The superintendent shall receive and evaluate all proposals and making recommendation to the Board of Education for acceptance. Then the Board of Education can review those proposals and recommend the purchase. Since this is a proposal system, not a bidding system, the school district in no way shall be obligated to award the contract to the lowest proposal, but shall reserve the right to reject any and all proposals or waive any informality in the proposal if it deems advisable. Purchases of over $90,000 requires the superintendent to advertise for sealed bids, which will be open in conformity with any applicable laws and in compliance with the procedures established by the school district and by the superintendent. The board again retains the right to determine the responsibility of the bidders and shall award the contract to the lowest responsible, not the lowest cost, but the lowest responsible bidder meeting the specifications, be the bidder a member or apart from the local community. So, as we've mentioned earlier, you're going to have a nickel needs and a 1 cent penny budget to cover those needs. So, finding alternative funding options is very important for you to consider. The Special Building Fund, the Qualified Capital Purpose Fund, donations, rental facilities are some examples. But creative alternative funding methods are also necessary to increase revenue to reduce stress on the general fund and special building fund budgets. Here are some of the examples of methods that I've used to gain non-traditional funding for large capital purchases. As I shared, I keep Google Docs, and I also keep a Google Doc to track grants and donations that we as a district are chasing. I touch on the importance for administrators to partner with local communities to request donations and write grants. We celebrate the successes at each meeting that we have. This year in Blair, we received over $400,000 in donations and grants that were written by our school administrators. This was really powerful for us and helpful for us to go from a school district that had no one-to-one initiative to funding an entire 3 through 12th grade one-to-one initiative, all through donations. None of it was, so 100% was of the revenue was brought in by donations, and so it didn't impact our general fund budget. So the superintendent needs to encourage teachers, staff, and administrators to work with industry partners to search for partnerships and donations. This year, our agriculture teacher reached out and received 20 new engines for our small engines program, valued at over $20,000. Next year, we're starting an industrial robotics program, and it's entirely funded by grants and donations, including the building renovations. Community business sponsors our scoreboards, contributes to pay for a lot of school activity trips, our longer trips, and some of the, for example, fine arts boosters pay for essential equipment. A superintendent needs to regularly attend local organizations. For example, in Blair, we have a middle school fine arts booster club, a high school fine arts booster club, and also an activities booster club. We have a school foundation and a PTO at each one of the schools. And so I'm very active in meeting with those parents because, again, this is a key opportunity to bring in non-traditional funding to help support programs. I'm also involved with the Rotary, the Lions Club, Kiwanis, and also with the County Economic Development Organization called Gateway, the Chamber of Commerce, and also some organizations in the Omaha area, again, so that we can provide non-traditional funding in our buildings. But before we move too much further, I want to talk about cost per pupil and how cost per pupil can control the overall general fund spending in a school district. The superintendent, I believe, should know the district cost per pupil and how it compares with districts of similar size, and especially in your geographical area. The superintendent must closely monitor student participation and enrollment in classes, programs, activities, etc. And you must be able to maximize class sizes wherever possible, but still guarantee the highest quality academic program that is desired by your community stakeholders and that can be funded. I believe it's critically important to control the percentage payroll represents in a general fund budget. I believe it should be between 78 and 82%. As I said earlier, ours grew to 90%. A superintendent must project out a 3% cost inflation to cover the overall cost of personnel. If your revenue isn't growing by 3%, a superintendent will have to cover the cost by reducing maintenance, curriculum budgets, or other budgets. Nebraska has spending lists that don't allow school budgets to grow over 1.5%. Herein lies much of the problem and the challenges that superintendents have. We all want to invest in our most precious resources, our students and our staff, but a superintendent's greatest challenge is finding balance because none are given the resources to fund everything. Developing a capital forecast will help a superintendent plan a long-range capital replacement plan and an annual budget. As you can see, one of the first things I did was run our cost per pupil against the lowest cost per pupil comparisons in Nebraska. we did really well in 2017, 18. We were the 10 lowest in Nebraska. But when you look at cost per pupil comparisons, Gretna, Elkhorn, Norris are all school districts that are within our same conference and within our same geographical area. Bennington is also in our conference and, again, our neighboring district. Their enrollment is slightly more than ours, and when you start looking at Norris, whose enrollment is almost identical to ours, and you look to see that they're spending um, about $300 less per kid than we are, which equates to about $600,000 per year. And Bennington's spending almost $1,000 per student less than we are, which equates to about $2.6 million per year. I knew that we could do better. We started looking again at our class sizes, and we had class sizes in kindergarten and the middle school of about 16-1. Part of an expenditure reduction plan we did was increase those class sizes to about 22, 23, which again brought us closer to Bennington's spending cost per pupil and allowed the percentage of our payroll to drop from 90% of the overall budget to next year it's going to be at 78% of the overall budget, which gives us $1 million of flexibility. That $1 million of flexibility can be used to either lower taxes, levy increased taxes to the special building fund or qualified capital purpose fund, or just to be able to create more money going into the depreciation fund or create line items in our general fund that allow for the replacement of capital purpose items. So the next area I want to talk about is how does it work to obtain a bond. There are really 4 steps for obtaining a bond. First, you want to contact your legal counsel to support you in developing a resolution for a bond referendum to be conducted. Next, you would want to select a bond attorney. Then you're going to accept bids for the bond and arrange with the county for either a mail or a polling location. What are the different types of bonds? There's several different types of bonds that you could be used to finance new construction. There's term bonds, sinking bonds, serial bonds, and amortized bonds. The first question you want to ask is, when is the right time to build, replace, or renovate? It's a question that a superintendent must be constantly asking themselves, and it's usually driven by whether student enrollment is increasing, and it's also driven by whether or not their existing building can support all the programs for the next 40 to 60 years. The real question is, what are the costs associated with making a building and grounds its best self? Is the best self more effective for student learning, activities, and community engagement over the next 40 to 60 years? A superintendent needs to answer that question first by calculating costs. If, for example, the BCEF form indicates that 50% of a building must be renovated at a cost of $280 a square foot, and the square footage is $100,000, then the cost to renovate would be $14 million plus architect and construction management fees. Architect fees are 12 to 14% for renovated projects. The construction manager costs 4%. Other soft costs typically carry an additional 5 to 8%. Plus, add 24% to a renovated project, so you get another $3.3 million. Building a new 100,000 square foot building at $300 per square foot would cost $30 million plus 20% or $6 million in soft costs because the architect's fee drops to 8%. The question is, would a community rather spend $36 million for an all-new building or $17.3 million for a renovated building. Of course, a lot of these comparisons depend on the renovated square foot or versus the cost per square foot for new. Square footage costs vary depending on the geographical area and the current demand. The market drives these prices, but you can bet construction prices rarely will drop. Inflation keeps them rising. Another important question a superintendent must assess if new facilities are necessary for students to participate in new programs or has student enrollment increased. Richard Boschler and Michael Poe share the following guidelines when a superintendent has to make difficult decisions regarding school additions. In addition to an existing facility is financially or educationally questionable if any of these 7 conditions exist. The school under consideration is no longer needed in the present location. The building has structural defects that cannot be corrected at a reasonable cost. The school is educationally obsolete and cannot be modernized at a reasonable cost. The building is unsafe or unhealthful and cannot be made safe and sound at a reasonable cost. The site is inadequate and cannot be expanded or improved at a reasonable cost. The addition would not be part of both a short-term and a long-range building program. The cost of adding to the school is unreasonable in relation to the probable useful life of an existing building. In summary, schools tend to choose new construction when it is necessary for adding new programs or when enrollment is increasing. If a superintendent wishes to pass a bond to attain finances to build a new building or renovate existing buildings, the process for obtaining a bond is that the superintendent first must lead the school board to pass a resolution for a bond referendum to be conducted. The school board must also choose the services of a bond attorney. The bank, brokerage firm, investment house who submits the lowest percentage interest rate usually gets chosen. Oftentimes, pension funds are big investors in school bonds because of the tax-free income incentives. Next, the superintendent would need to contact the local county to conduct a bond election. Bond elections can be held at polling locations or by mail. The most popular type of bond is a serial bond. This is because they do not require a large balloon payment. Serial bonds are redeemed at various times during the life of the bond. A set number of bonds are scheduled to be redeemed in 5-year increments until the bond is retired. The school board can utilize maturation dates to raise enough money to retire a portion of the bond without raising the entire amount at one time. This spreads out the entire repayment of the bond over many years. Amortized bonds are another type of bond that can be used and also offer no balloon payment. Investors buy amortized bonds and receive 2 payments per year that includes principal and interest. The repayment schedule for the entire school district allows for the retirement of part of the principal over the bond's life. Term bonds and sinking bonds are other types of bonds. A term bond is not recommended due to the high balloon payments at the end of the term. A school only pays the interest on a term bond for an established time period. When the term expires, the school must pay the entire principal of the bond. This balloon payment isn't attractive for most school districts. Here's how a sinking bond works. The school only pays its interest each year. They also set aside an amount each year to pay off the principal. This principal amount is established to draw interest from the school. At the end of the loan, the school is required to pay all principal. Sinking funds are not recommended as they are illegal in many states. Interest rates on a bond is directly related to the credit rating of the school system. The lower the credit rating, the higher the interest the school system has to pay the investor holding the bond because the bond is considered more at risk. Credit rating scales of the school system are indicated by letters from capital AAA to capital A, lowercase a down to CD, according to Moody's Investor Service Standard & Poor's and Fitch Investor Service. During Module 3, I will discuss how to develop specs for new schools or for renovating areas. I will also discuss when it is necessary to use an architect for capital project renovation and new projects. Finally, I will share the role of an architect construction manager and how to choose a construction delivery method.